My first love. It's very stupid of me to have forgotten about you. Maybe I was too young to have known, or maybe I just chose to forget. Regardless of the reason, how could I have ever forgotten you? I remember meeting you when I was 4, the moment my parents taught me the alphabet. I remember the way the letters swirled around and around as I struggled with the sound of them. You were there, waiting for me. You waited until I was 5 and could hold a pencil. I remember learning how to write the alphabet, learning to add curls to the ends of my Y's and backs of my A's, to cross my T's and dot my I's. When I learned how to write, that was the first time I saw you. I picked up books next, Junie B. Jones, Fancy Nancy, Hello Kitty and Friends. I learned to trace your letters with my fingers and put them together to form words that I treasured dearly. The smell of paper welcomed me, the creamy texture smoothed against my little palms, illustrations grabbing at me as I looked at their colors. I think that was when I started looking for you wherever I went, reminded of you in the little things. But what really made me fall for you was when I wrote my first story. It was in a falling apart notebook, where the spine was detached from the pages. Purple hydrangeas decorated the cover and pages, specks of silver peeking from it. My name was written in big messy letters on the "This notebook belongs to" part. My A's had curled backs, and my T's had curled tails. I wrote a story on the lavender-colored pages filled with hydrangeas. It wasn't anything good, just a story about my birthday and going to school. It wasn't anything special, and if an adult were to look at it, they would just say good job to be polite. But it was my first story. How could I forget about it? I fell in love with you then, and I haven't stopped loving you since. You brought color to my world, drenched my skies with baby blues, and dipped my walls in lavender purple, just like that notebook. You made me find the mundane beautiful, made me treasure all these little moments that I never found important before. With you, everything was new. With you, every moment felt special. You taught me how to live in another's life, how to craft worlds and emotions entirely different from my own. Late into the night, you would whisper in my ear, and we would recount the day together, my fingers itching for a piece of paper and pencil. I learned how to craft stories in my mind, sitting in cars looking out windows at passing trees. I would envision little girls and boys running up hills. You made me see things that weren't even there, and you made me yearn for the impossible. It's thanks to you that I began to dabble in different writing forms. Prose came first, and I would craft stories that went unfinished, envisioning a beginning and end, but no middle in between, or a beginning and middle, but no end to be seen. Prose left a sore spot in my heart, because it was always left unfinished. There was no completion that came from it, but you didn't let me dwell over it for too long. You gave me poetry next. Poetry felt boundless. I thought it was meant to rhyme, and I was so caught up in the act of making it rhyme that my words dictated my feelings, not the other way around. But you stayed by my side, and we worked through it together. I discovered what poetry meant, and I learned to fall in love with it. Poetry wasn't like prose. It felt more personal. It hyper-focused on emotions, and it had a sense about it that made me breathless. I kept making drafts, short little stuff for every day of the month. A notebook was kept, gray sparkles with a fairy pin to the cover. It was filled with poems that weren't anything special. There were haikus and free verse and some that rhymed, but if I were to show it to someone, they would have just smiled politely. They weren't special or anything that made your heart race, but they were my first poems, and how could I forget them? Together we stuck with poetry for a while. We weren't masters, and we certainly didn't turn heads, but there was something about bringing that notebook around with us that made it special. You led me to a place that was filled with others like me, and I marveled at their poems. In the night, we would dissect their pieces and be left with metaphors and similes and connotations and imagery. We would be left with pieces of pieces, and we would take them and use them as our muse. Poetry became much more than just words on the page for me then. Soon we began to find elements in my poems that seemed almost lyrical, and some thought the same. For those that stayed, they watched me grow, and they picked apart my writing as I did for others. We were part of this cycle, and I never forget those nights we spent drenched in the light of the screen. You never let me forget you, because when I lost someone and couldn't type anything for a month, or craft worlds, or stick with poetry, I wanted to stop forever. I didn't want to go back to that world, but you kept calling for me. You kept urging me until my heart would beat too fast, and I would yearn whenever I heard your name. My fingers would itch for a computer, and I would trace your letters with my eyes. I could never forget you, no matter how hard I tried. And you never let me forget. Writing, my first love, thank you.